Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily News. I'm Nicholas Richardson. There is a first response from Israel to Monday's rocket attack. This morning, missiles fell on the southern part of Beirut. Tel Aviv warns that this is not the end of the operation and airstrikes will continue. Meanwhile, the White House is warning against an escalation of the conflict, and Spanish authorities have already sent military aircraft to evacuate their citizens from Lebanon. Our special envoy to the Middle East, Rafał Stańczyk, is following the situation on the ground.
The most important question being asked here in the Middle East is, what Israel's response to Monday's missile attack will be. I will just remind you that it was then that Iran launched nearly 200 ballistic missiles. Fortunately, the vast majority were destroyed by Israeli, but also American, anti-missile systems. However, some of the missiles did reach their targets. While the losses are minimal, this is indeed an attack on Israel's image.
We found ourselves with lots of alarms and crazy bombing, crazy sounds of bombing above our heads, and watching the news at the same time and seeing all the missiles coming. It's crazy.
We were not afraid. We wish to finish this war at last and to find ourselves in a better neighborhood. We will survive. We will prevail, and we are strong, and we want to finish that.
Already, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu says it was Iran's mistake and said Iran will pay dearly for it. What is behind those words? We don't know yet, but it is already clear that the first victim of this Israeli revenge is Lebanon, for the reason that missiles fell on the southern part of Beirut this morning. At least 6 people were killed. We are people who are used to wars. We are scared for sure, but not to the extent of leaving our homes. What can we do? We got used to it. May God protect us. These rockets haven't fallen on the Lebanese capital since 2006, which is the best evidence of the increasingly heated atmosphere in this part of the world. The situation is getting worse and worse. Although Spain, for example, is preparing to evacuate its residents from Lebanon, and all this is happening almost on the eve of the anniversary of the attack organized by Hamas, when Hamas terrorists attacked civilian targets on the 7th of October. They also took a number of hostages inside Israel. The situation is increasingly tense. This is also seen by the world, such as US President Joe Biden, who stated and warned Israel not to attack nuclear targets inside Iran. But here, unfortunately, any option is possible.
According to the new debt management strategy for the public finance sector, published by the Polish Finance Ministry and adopted in September, the funds for the Armed Forces Support Fund, which finances the purchase of new equipment for the Polish army, are expected to fall by about 67 billion zloty by 2027. The question arises, how does the ruling coalition, which has long argued that it is continuing the arms contracts with the United States and South Korea, which were still started by the United Right, want to finance them?
In a strategy adopted in September and published this week by the Ministry of Finance, appropriations to the Armed Forces Support Fund are expected to drop by about 20% by 2027. According to the new strategy, funds that fed into the fund as recently as 2023 are expected to drop by more than 19 billion zloty. This year by 10.3 billion, in 2025 by more than 12.5 billion, in 2026 by 8.6 billion zloty, and in 2027 by more than 16 billion, a total of nearly 67 billion zloty. In 2028, the fund is expected to contribute only about 35 billion zloty. They reduced the money allocated for the modernization of the Polish military in the period until 2027 from 314 billion zloty to 247 billion zloty. This means they are turning on the money is not there and will not be there protocol. According to the Law on Defense of the Fatherland, adopted 2 years ago, the Armed Forces Support Fund was created with the primary task of financing the purchase of equipment and arms for the Polish army. Funding for this fund is provided by proceeds from Treasury securities, state-guaranteed bonds issued by the National Development Bank, payments from the state budget, and a portion of the profit of the National Bank of Poland. It looks as though the current government is not taking advantage of the financing opportunities offered by the fund, and the new strategy of the Ministry of Finance does not go hand in hand with the expansion of the Polish military. The Armed Forces Support Fund for the current year has been used by only a few percent, despite the fact that 3/4 of the time has passed. The size of this fund is to be reduced by more than 66 billion zloty in the coming years. This means that the Polish army's rearmament program will be severely limited. That's because not much has been happening in technical modernization since the coalition took power. But the Ministry of Defense has recently been posting a lot of photos on the X portal of the continuing visit to South Korea by Deputy Defense Minister Paweł Bejda. Officially, everything is in the best order regarding negotiations with the Koreans, but unofficially, it is said that the Ministry of Defense expects Seoul to fully fund arms purchases. I'm not sure that such a technologically advanced and well-functioning armament company as the Korean one can afford to partner with someone as irresponsible and failing as the current team leading the Ministry of Defense. It's all about the large rearmament plan. K9 Thunder cannon howitzers, Chunmoo rocket launchers and Fa-50 aircraft, and 1,000 K2 tanks, most of which were to be produced in Poland. 180 tanks were supposed to be bought in September. They are not. Now there is talk of November. Most likely, such are the hearings in the Ministry of Defense, that this contract will also not be realized. And the reason for this is to be found precisely in the budget, in the fulfillment of the Armed Forces Support Fund. A few months ago, we arrived at a draft of the Ministry of Defense's financial plan, assuming a reduction of more than 57 billion zloty in central material plans by 2028. The current leadership of the Defense Ministry loudly denied it and boasted of a record budget for defense. And according to the new strategy, the reduction for new equipment for the military is now nearly 70 billion.
Another factory has collapsed after a century. Nearly 130 workers have lost their jobs. Production has already stopped for good and the company's assets are to be sold off. On top of that, state-owned companies are running at losses instead of profits, and the Finance Minister is changing the budget not only for this year but for next year as well. What's going on? And will the Polish government be able to salvage the situation?
A decision has come out of the blue that the company will be closed, and it is not known what will happen next. People's dissatisfaction is great. Their anger is enormous. Overnight, we found out that this plant will not exist, and what is strange, not from them, but from the media, from you. These are the protesters after the closure of the Beko production in Wrocław. But this is not the end of the story. Another 100 people will be put on the street because another factory is being closed. On this map of layoffs, unfortunately, the next point must be marked. Now the Signify light bulb factory in Bielsko-Biała is going bankrupt. 128 people lost their jobs overnight. What's going on? Unfortunately, this instability of laws, regulations, or just inflation are the biggest risks that entrepreneurs and companies think about, and this is the reason for their exodus. The latest data confirm that inflation in Poland is rising. It has already exceeded the range allowed for by the NBP. In September, it rose to 4.9% year on year. It is much more expensive. Not more expensive, but much more expensive. We have been the assembly plant of Europe for 2 decades, doing fairly simple work for the industries of other economies. We are becoming a little less competitive with countries that are, simply put, cheaper. The state-owned companies also report losses instead of profits. By the end of the month, they had all sent in their results. The overall result? The second quarter of 2024 showed a loss of 322 million zloty, while a year ago, in the same period, the same companies reported a profit of 11.5 billion zloty. What does the government plan? The absolute priority is the work on this budget, which in fact was adopted in August. Now we had it again in the government, it went to the Social Dialogue Council, it came back to the government, we made amendments, which I'll tell you about in a moment, and on Monday it will go to Parliament. According to the government's amended draft, budget revenues will amount to almost 632 billion zloty. Expenditure on the budget will be 921 billion zloty. This record deficit is to total 288 billion zloty. The salvation would be a return to the fastest possible implementation of the CPK, nuclear power plants and other important investments. We want to work.
The lack of money in the health budget is taking its toll on patients. Admissions to some hospitals are being halted and some facilities are being closed. As a result, medical staff fear for their jobs. The Ministry of Health can't seem to figure out how much money it needs to fill the gap. The Minister and her deputy are talking about amounts that differ by as much as 2 billion zloty. Considering that 11 hospitals have not received any money for extra performance, it would be worthwhile to clarify this issue, as it is a huge amount that could save many a hospital budget. The dramatic situation is also affecting nursing homes, which can no longer afford to look after their residents.
The fact that the National Health Fund does not have enough money has been talked about for a long time. Among other things, there is no money for additional medical services, and this is only the tip of the iceberg. Hospitals are cancelling admissions, postponing them until next month or even next year, because they are not sure whether these debts will be paid. And the situation is getting worse. Hospitals in 11 provinces have still not received funds from the National Health Fund for excess services from unlimited services in the second quarter of this year. Primary healthcare facilities are also waiting for money, and dentists are warning that patients may soon be left without access to care under universal insurance. Hospitals are already 20 billion zloty in debt, and the Ministry of Health doesn't know how much money is actually missing from the National Health Fund. This year we need 3 billion zloty to settle accounts with hospitals. We know that this is what they need to pay for overperforming for the third quarter of this year, 5 billion zloty. Patients wait weeks for surgery or a doctor's appointment and often can't afford private care. It will come to a point where some citizens simply can't afford it, won't afford it. People will get sick and suffer at home. In addition, hospital departments are being closed all over the country. This includes a facility on Barska Street. 2 departments will be closed there starting in December: trauma and orthopedic surgery and general surgery. The staff will be transferred to the hospital in Brudno. I've been working here since 2005 and frankly, I'd like to stay here. To make us face a final decision where we are offered another job and we don't know for how long. We were lied to, we were deceived. If we had known, then maybe we would have looked for a job sooner. The financial problems have also affected the hospital in Żywiec. We do not pay salaries to medical staff on time. We pay with long delays and in installments. More than 20 doctors have already left. They will close, then there will be no hospital. People will be cut off. Nursing homes are already facing financial problems. This is due to the reduction of funding for wards placed in centres before 2004. The amount was reduced by 560 zloty. Now it is 3,800 zloty. The monthly cost of care is about 7,000 zloty. We are already in October and we are on the verge of bankruptcy. There are many such nursing homes, for example. The nursing home in Wrocław has already filed for liquidation. This is no longer a cry for help, it's death throes. And the Minister of Health, Izabela Leszczyna, admits that the costs of the National Health Fund are growing faster than revenues. It's just a shame that the Health Ministry hasn't counted how much is actually missing. This year we need 3 billion zloty to settle accounts with hospitals. We know that we are lacking, in order to pay the surplus payments for the third quarter of this year, 5 billion zloty.
That's the news. Thank you for watching, and from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.